Welcome to the podcast, Life is a Story We Tell Ourselves. I'm Anna Murphy. In this week's episode, we will have a conversation about golf, social justice, and race, and the strained relationship between the three over the years. Golf has been characterized as an elitist sport, especially in the professional ranks. We will explore whether that is a fair characterization and explore what golf is doing to make American society a more just society. Let's listen together.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the podcast, Life is a Story We Tell Ourselves. Our guest today is Michael Williams. Michael is the founder and managing director of Cyrano Communications, a Washington-based consultancy that advises organizations in the public and private sector on cultural exchange through commerce, athletics, and the arts. Michael is also a contributor to a wide range of charitable organizations, including being a board member of the Peter G. Dodge Foundation. Mr. Williams is a special consultant to the Eisenhower Memorial Commission, which is authorized by the White House and Congress to establish the memorial to President Eisenhower. Michael is also a member of the United States Golf Association and was recently named USGA Golf Journal to the USGA Golf Journal editorial board. Welcome to the program, Michael. And he's also one of my best friends.
Thank you so much, Don. That should have been right at the top. That's probably one of my more proud accomplishments, is being counted as one of your friends. So it's really good to join you. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, well, I feel the same way. Well, let's get right to it. You know, Michael, I know you were involved with the First Tee at one time. Tell us about that involvement with the First Tee, and what is the First Tee exactly, and what was it supposed to do to help young golfers?
The First Tee is an organization that was set up by the golf industry over 20 years ago. And the idea was, after the boom in golf that Tiger Woods created with his win at the Masters in 1997, the idea was that we wanted to get more minorities, more youth into the game, especially youth minorities into the game of golf. So the First Tee was founded as an organization designed to reach out into underserved communities. And we say underserved, defined as communities that didn't have access to the golf courses and the resources needed for kids to get into golf and to sustain their interest in golf. So we created the organization on a chapter basis to reach out into the communities and get those kids to the golf course. And while they're there, teach them the game of golf along with 9 core values, such as honesty, integrity, and other things that are beneficial to the overall character of the person. So the organization has been largely a success in that. That's how it started. Over time, the mission of the organization began to morph from serving underserved communities into a more general recruitment of youth into the game, building a pipeline of young golfers to replace golfers who were leaving the game after they get to adulthood, because it's been a common problem over the years with golf that you sort of gain X number of players and lose X -2 for a variety of reasons, be it cost or time. You have kids and you can't play, career concerns, all sorts of things contribute to that. So a couple of years ago, actually less than a year ago, the organization sort of officially changed its mission to just recruiting young golfers into the game. And so it started off as something very, very valuable. It continues to be something very, very valuable, but the mission has changed. And so therefore my involvement with it has changed.
Yeah. So they no longer have that real focus on bringing underserved youth or underserved communities into the game of golf. I mean, that remains, part of it ostensibly, but it's not a focus that they have. I noticed that the First Tee has been real successful with their commercials. They put on some pretty slick commercials, and they seem to have some good sponsorship. So I wonder, have they been, successful or had any success at all in recruiting golfers from underserved communities? And then do we see any of those recruitees on the PGA Tour today?
There have been, well, let's start with the success in sponsorship, because it's a very, very successful organization nationally in terms of sponsorship. And you have, organizations like Shell and very large major corporations that are major sponsors of the organization. So it's doing very well from that sense. In certain chapters, for instance, the chapter here in my city, Washington, D.C., there's a Greater Washington chapter that now has an endowment, I believe, of over $1 million. And again, it's a chapter-based organization. So while the national mission has changed to this general recruitment of youth, certain chapters will choose to be faithful to their original mission and will do more programming to underserved communities and in schools than others. So it's a mixed bag, but again, the national focus has changed, and it's on that national mission that you raise money. So I think that there's something to be said for that. As the guy said, follow the money. You ask about golfers who have joined the tour. The most significant golfer from the First Tee program is a guy named Scott Langley, who is he's white. It wasn't a minority who has emerged as a player on the tour. And look, that's just fine, because he represents both the success of the 9 core values part of the First Tee program, but also the ability to promote talented players, even tour quality players. And that's just awesome. We haven't seen that minority player come out of the First Tee program yet. And again, I'll say that's not a black mark against them. That's not what the program is there for. But I would love to see it happen, or the development of a program that specifically has that mission. And there are a number of programs that are working and trying to establish themselves in getting tour players out of minority communities. But again, we just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, we're going to talk about one of those programs a little later in the program. Golf has a rep as an elitist and expensive sport, especially the elitist image. Is that a fair characterization of the sport? I mean, you've been around it a long time, interviewed a lot of people. What do you think about that characterization?
Well, they come by it honestly. Yeah, I think it is a fair characterization of how the sport, of how it developed in the United States, let's say, and especially post-World War II United States. So the sport, if you go to its countries of origin, say Scotland and Ireland, it's very much a sport of the people. There are hundreds and hundreds of golf courses, and some of the oldest and best and most famous golf courses in the world are public golf courses. I mean, truly public golf courses, where it costs about $15 US to this day to still play a round of golf and then go in and, have a wee nip of scotch, at the bar. It's a very, very grassroots, very, very family oriented, very community thing to do. Even St. Andrews, and I'll share this story. You may not know this, but St. Andrews is actually just a city park. The first golf course, and maybe the most famous golf course in the world, St. Andrews, it's a city park. And it doesn't have tee times on Sunday. On Sunday, it's an open park. Nobody plays golf, and you'll find on the most famous golf course in the world, where the best golfers in the world have played, Jack Nicklaus, Bobby Jones, Tiger Woods, right down the line. On Sunday, there's just people out there having picnics and walking their dogs on the golf course. And one of the biggest scams, not a good scam, one of the most common scams in the world is for these guys out there on the internet who are selling tee times at St. Andrews on Sunday. Well, there are none. So you get to Scotland and have yourself a Sunday tee time. I hope you have a backup plan. But golf, sorry.
Yeah, I said that's good for our listeners to know so they don't get scammed.
Yeah, exactly. This is a public service announcement from me. Okay, no tee times on St. Andrews on Sunday. But to continue with the answer to the question, in the United States, post World War II, golf was about the communities that were being set up, the post-war residential communities, and the country club. So the game sort of grew around the country club setting. It got established in the United States at the sort of elite clubs of the Northeast, your Winged Foot, Shinnecock, these sorts of places, but it expanded around the country club ethos being spread around the country. Yes, public golf courses did get built and the sport did flourish in those places, but because golf had gates built around it, for 40 to 50 years, that's why it became rightfully thought of as a sport where mostly if you were going to advance, you had to have a certain station in life, to get into the game and or to get very far in the game.
Well, that's interesting. So if you look at England and Scotland and Ireland and these places where golf developed and it wasn't such an elitist sport. So in contrast, did you find more individuals, young people able to play the game of golf and come up and then become a professional from more humble backgrounds or from very poor backgrounds in the beginning than you do in the U.S., where you tend to see a lot more rich kids becoming professional golfers?
Yeah, that is a pretty common thing, or has been a pretty common thing, I'll say, until the modern golfer. Again, when we get to the age of sort of the 90s, certainly in the Tiger era, where the technology takes over and technology costs money. But in the early days of the game, both in Europe and in the United States, it wasn't uncommon to see kids who had started off with nothing. They were dirt poor and were caddies, not only to get into the game, but maybe to bring home a couple of dollars, on the chance that, some big shot from the country club would give them a big tip. And hey, the family gets to eat meat that night. One of the most famous examples of that is Sam Snead. Sam Snead was dirt poor, and he didn't have shoes, I think, until he was in his teens that didn't belong to somebody else. Somebody else first. He was famous for playing golf. He learned how to play golf barefoot because he didn't have golf shoes. But that was what gave him his signature tempo and swing and his balance and his smoothness of his swing, is because he had to play on grass barefoot. And you can't be unbalanced when you don't have golf shoes. But Sam went on to be now he and Tiger are tied for the most wins in PGA Tour history. That's how good that guy became. And those were not uncommon stories. But the game now, the modern game, requires so much technology. You need clubs that are fitted. You need the newest technology, which allows you to hit the ball farther and farther. You have to be able to get tee times to get onto the courses to play. You have to be able to afford the hundreds and hundreds, let me say thousands and thousands of practice balls that you have to hit to refine and hone your skills to be of anything approaching a PGA Tour level. And then once you get to that level, you have to get the travel money, the expenses to stay overnight, to travel on the junior tours, get into an NCAA event. The amount of money that goes into creating a professional golfer is astronomical before you earn a dollar. And the reason this is significant is because those who are well-heeled don't even necessarily have to come out of pocket for themselves. If you're a member of an elite golf club, there'll be a line out the door of the men's grill of guys who are willing to sign a check so that they can sponsor you like a NASCAR race car. Hey, I want to contribute to this guy's success, and they'll do that. But what if you don't have that type of network supporting you? You can have all the talent you want, but if you don't have the backing, the financial backing to make that happen, well, you're going to be out of luck, literally out of luck for this. So there's a financial component to becoming a golfer that players in other sports just don't have. I always say a first round draft choice in the NBA, if he's standing there holding a basketball, it could be the basketball that he got for Christmas when he was 10 years old. And he's played with it every day since because he's grown, but that basketball stayed the same. That's not going to be the case for anybody who achieves success on the PGA level.
Well, it seems that all of those elements that you just described, which were many, are real barriers to people entering the sport, not just people from underrepresented backgrounds, but people in general.
That's right.
I noticed that often it's asked, why don't we see more ethnic minorities in sports, more people from underrepresented groups in a sport like golf? And I think those elements that you just described are all real barriers. It's funny, though, when people get asked that question, they kind of go blank and they say, well, gee, I don't know, but there are real and tangible barriers, and I think you just described many of them.
Yeah, and I think it's a great idea to point out that these are barriers that are faced by anybody who wants to get into the game. But the thing is, the same barriers that create increased hurdles for people of color, for women in the society and opportunity in general, are the same hurdles that you face in getting into golf. It's about the difference in opportunity, the difference between equity and equality. Equality means having the ability that everyone is worth the same thing. Equity is about opportunity, the equity of opportunity. And that's what you see so lacking in the game of golf.
Yeah, I understand. Well, we've heard here, we hear, and we've heard from a lot of athletes during these racially divisive times in the United States. However, not a lot of golfers have chimed in. Am I wrong, or are they doing their part in some other way, or doing it quietly? What's your take on that?
Well, some golfers have taken a stand to the point of they've made statements, into a microphone saying, we support equality, we support the racial reckoning that is coming in the United States, and stand on the side of equality and equity in our society, inclusiveness in our society. I will say that the governing bodies of the game have been as responsive as I've ever seen them. And they recognize that this is a point where you just can't say, I'm for it, and that will be your action and your stance, because apathy will be interpreted as being opposed to the issue. On the individual basis for the PGA Tour golfers, these are, by and large, apolitical people. And also they are classic introverts. They're not prone to being public with their sentiments and their things like that. So they haven't, by and large, been that way in this. Also, they're dealing in an environment that is largely conservative in its political bent. You won't hear anybody necessarily come out and say that, but sometimes that position it kind of rears its ugly head. There is a golfer by the name of Kirk Triplett who's been on various professional tours for most of the last 35 years. Kirk's one of the most well-liked people in professional golf. He's probably best known for a signature sort of bucket hat that he likes to wear. And I think you like to wear one too, Don. That sort of bucket hat when he plays. He's won a number of professional events, been more successful on the senior tour than he has on the regular tour. But Kirk is an interesting man because he adopted an African-American son, and in support, which makes him one of the few people. I'm going to be writing an article about this very shortly for The Undefeated. Kirk is one of the few white men who's had to have the talk about the police to a black son. Puts a very unique position. He put a Black Lives Matter sticker to support his son on his bag and was excoriated for it on social media by golf fans, by some golf media even, who called him a supporter of a terrorist organization. So there haven't been as many people who have stood up as Kirk has, even just to put a Black Lives Matter sticker, on their bag, and he met with a backlash. I think people have tried to say the right things, but there hasn't been a lot of risk involved in the things that they said, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I understand. Well, that leads me to something that you were directly involved in terms of a major golfer being racially insensitive. I mean, I know he's a good guy. I know Charles Howell III, and I wouldn't characterize him as a racist by any stretch of the imagination, but he did make a pretty insensitive remark. And I'm asking about it to you in particular, because you were there when he made the remark I think it was at a press event, and you handled it in a way that I thought was thoughtful, direct, and non-confrontational to Charles. And I'm also asking it because many people say they don't know how to talk about race, but you did it, and in public. Why don't you tell us about that incident?
Okay. Well, Charles Howell III is one of those guys who quietly just logs success on the PGA Tour. I think he's been a pro for 20 years. I think this is his 20th year on the professional tour. He was a very successful amateur golfer, born and raised in Augusta, Georgia, the home of the Augusta Invitational, also known as the Masters Tournament. So where if he had grown up in, I don't know, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he may have wanted to be a baseball player or a football player. But when you grow up in Augusta, Georgia, you definitely want to be a golfer. And he was supported in that, showed some talent for it, was an All-America at Oklahoma State University, won in his second year or his first full year on the PGA Tour. And over the last 20 years, I believe he's won 16 events, I believe it is, and some $40 million in earnings. By any stretch, you would call that a successful career. I'd known of him, but hadn't known him quite so well, and he was at a sponsor event, and this is in 2019. We're at the U.S. Open, which held in Pebble Beach. It was the 100th anniversary of Pebble Beach, so I was so pleased to be there for that one. And one of Charles's sponsors hosted a post-round interview with him and another golfer who also sponsored by the same company. And it was ostensibly going to be one of those things where the golfer interviews are generally pretty boring. I hit some good shots and I hit some putts, and tomorrow I'd like to hit some good shots and hit some putts. But there was a Q&A involved, and it was a small group gathering, and I thought that I'd be able to ask some questions about his career and how he, as a relatively small guy, he's only 5'8", about 150 pounds. Now he's holding up against these increasingly large and talented athletes that are on the PGA Tour. This was my intent going in. And small room, about 70 folks. And there was no media there except for me, which is kind of a surprise. And the moderator there, who's from the Golf Channel, again, Todd Lewis, also a friend now, asked Charles to tell a story about, just to tell a funny story. And he said the story was about the night that Tiger Woods' Escalade ran into the fire hydrant, which started his whole sort of spiral into despair, the marital troubles and all that. Everybody knows about it. And he said that Charles, the host said, well, Charles, you told me a story about how you decided to play a joke on the assembled media that was around, the media circus that was around that accident. So Charles went on to tell the story about how, in order to try to get the media to think that he was Tiger, he said that he put on a wig, and his quote was, I went to put on shoe polish, magic marker, and all the other dark stuff that I could find to darken my skin. Then I got a blonde to sit next to me in a black Escalade, and we rode around trying to get the press to follow us. And they did for a while, and then they did. And I was sitting in the audience listening to him tell this story. I was about 15 feet in front of him and recording this thing. And as the story was being told, I could feel my face just getting flushed with, a variety of emotions. It was anger, of course, embarrassment for him, also disbelief. Is this really happening? Because just a couple of days before, the governor of Virginia was in a scandal that was almost forced him to resign for him having dressed up in blackface for a party, and that was almost 30 years after it came out. So here he is talking about something that he had done voluntarily in a setting where it's supposed to be something funny. This is something you think you would hide in a vault and never let it get out. I moved to the back of the room to try to compose myself on this one, and I'm thinking, because I'm here as a guest of the sponsor. I'm not necessarily here as media, but I am media. How do I handle this? What do I do? Do I say something? Do I say nothing? I decided to let it get to the end of the Q&A session and wait till the last question and then try to express myself. And again, I'm the only person of color in the room, by the way, who isn't serving guests. And believe me, every eye is on me, trying to figure out, is this guy going to say something? Because up until then, there had been sort of a combination of laughter and nervous laughter when he made the joke, which made me even more outraged. So it got to the point where Nobody looked like they were going to ask a question. I raised my hand, and what I said to him was, "Hey, Charles, first, congratulations on your career. I think you've had a great one, especially being, the player that you are for the size that you are and maximizing your gifts and all that sort of thing. Second thing I want to tell you is, don't ever tell that story again. I'm surprised that you did it. You shouldn't tell anybody about it because it's ignorant, it's embarrassing, and you could in seconds blow up everything that you've worked 20 years for." And he paused and he looked at me and he says, "Well, I'm sorry if you were offended. I didn't mean it. They just asked me for a funny story." I said, "It's not funny. It's not good." And again, repeated what I had said before. Afterwards, the sponsors had him come up and give an apology to me, which I think was sort of a confused, again, by him, sort of, "I'm sorry that you were offended." But about 20 people out of a room of 70 came up to me and said, "We're so glad you said something." And that sort of started an arc with me and Charles, because I had this feeling that I should tell this right away, that I should report this story. And this was my dilemma. How do I handle this? Because we're at the U.S. Open, which is run by the USGA, and these are my favorite golf governing body organization, my favorite tournament, held at one of the best golf courses in the world. To tell the story would have blown up this entire event. That would have been the story of the entire week. So I think, do I owe it to the sport not to report on this right now? But then on the other hand, am I being unfaithful to my responsibility as a reporter, to my responsibility as a Black man? Should I let him get away with it? There was another angel/devil on my shoulder saying, "Hey, why don't you report this right now to TMZ, because you'll get $10,000 and 10,000 followers." All these things are going through my mind. I talked it over with the USGA. I met with Todd Lewis to assure that he didn't know what that story was going to be. He told me that he didn't know that the story was going to be involving blackface. And I decided to try to get in touch with Charles and get in touch with the golf community and see, is this a one-off? Is this who this guy really is? Was this just a moment in time, or is this like the core of his character? And I decided that I would give it some time, up to a year. And at the end of that time, I would assess what had happened with him, with me, and between us. And then whatever that story was, I'd report it. If it was just a moment, I'd report that. If it was what he really was, if that story was the measure of the man, then I'd report that too. But I wanted to give it time. And that's the way our connection began.
Well, Charles has gone on to support the Advocates Pro Golf Association, and they have a mission to bring greater diversity to the sport by developing African Americans and other minorities for a variety of careers in golf. And I have to say, it seems to me that at least indirectly, if not directly, you're talking to him personally. And I think his sponsor's stepping up. I understand his sponsor required him to attend some diversity training. Yeah,
that's right. And again, that's to Charles's credit. He was required to take the diversity training, but he took it seriously. Mm-hmm. And it made an impact on him. And I'll say that what he learned from that was the difference between intent versus impact. He did not intend to hurt anybody's feelings. This is not in his nature. I've since learned that this is a Christian man. He is a family man. He is a guy who makes it his business to try not to hurt anybody as best as he can. He's a people pleaser, probably to a fault, which maybe led him to try to tell that type of story, to try to get a laugh where, he's not really the guy who goes into a room and speaks at all, much less, to a microphone trying to entertain people. But he learned from that session, and he talked to his friends of color. He talked to his trainer, who he'd known for years, and asked him, how do you feel as a Black man about what I said? And he told him, and he learned. And Don, the thing that impresses me the most about him is that he did all of this while my story was a secret. What happened in that room was still a secret. Nobody reported it. Nobody did. It didn't come out into the media. It didn't come out into the public. But he still got involved with the Advocates Tour, with doing the consulting. And the diversity training. He had to get other counseling as well, because that whole incident, he told me that, Michael, knowing that this had hurt you, just you in the room, drove him to a level of depression where he had to seek counseling from his pastor to bring himself out of that. And to his credit, he did. So again, the measure of his character is he didn't do it to save his reputation, it didn't become public. And then he said, well, let me go work with these kids, or work with this tour, or work with these people. It wasn't a mission of recovering his reputation. It was about perfecting his character. And I give him all credit for that.
Well, and I give you a lot of credit for it too, for handling it the way that you did, because so many times these things blow up. They do become fodder for the press, particularly press like TMZ, which you, and no good comes out of it, except a bunch of publicity and craziness, if you will. And so the way you handled it is the way conversations about race can happen between human beings, person to person, because at the end of the day, it's our common humanity that matters. And I think that's the lesson here. And I know that Charles ended up saying later, and this is a quote directly from him, he says, "I believe in a better America, and I want to be part of the solution." And I think that was a direct result of your interaction with him and that experience and what came out of it for him as a human being. And I think that's really important. But moving on to another, subject, you've had a lot of interviews with some pretty famous people, golf icons, if you will, like Gary Player, but still in the context of this whole thing about social justice and race and our common humanity. I mean, Gary Player played during his career much of the time when apartheid was still in effect in South Africa. And I've heard, you talked to Gary on several occasions, and he seems to be a lot more socially conscious now than he was years ago. What are your thoughts about Gary Player? I know you guys have a pretty close relationship.
Yeah, we do. He's kind of like I would say almost a mentor / uncle, because he's a great interview. Would love to get him on your show, Don, because all you have to ask him is how you doing, and then you get 40 minutes.
Forward.
You don't have to work out a big list of questions for Gary. Okay, he's always ready to speak his mind and talk about his experiences in the game and in the world. Famously, he says he's the person who's traveled the most air miles in the world, and that's probably true. The guy's always on a plane, even at close to 90 years old. No, he's always moving and interacting. Yeah, Gary is a guy who's very interesting because he was on the tour during his heyday, being from South Africa, and South Africa was a pariah in the world at that time because of apartheid. Right. So he was not well received by a lot of people at the tour events that he was attending. And it's funny because at that time, also playing on the PGA Tour was a man named Charlie Sifford.
Oh yes,
Charlie Sifford was the first African American PGA Tour professional, and of course you can imagine that Charlie Sifford faced so much anger and resentment to his participation on the tour. Famously, fans, when he would hit a ball into the fairway, would kick them into the rough, or if they were in the rough, would step on the ball, so it would be hard or impossible to find the names that he would be called. You can imagine. What's fascinating is those two became the closest of friends because of their common experience of that venom from the galleries. And when Charlie Sifford was inducted into the Hall of Fame, his introduction speech was given by Gary Player. And they, up until the day that Charlie Sifford died, they considered themselves brothers. Gary Player, being from South Africa, he knows what racism looks like in its most violent and virulent forms. And he is also now, that's why he's such a great fan of America, because and I say the United States of America and the Constitution, the flag, because of what it stands for, because of the potential that America stands for. And as he's grown, as do we all, he's learned how to include more people in that promise and understand what it means when some people are excluded from that promise. And that comes with experience from us all. I applaud Gary for his enthusiasm for the United States and I would say his eternal willingness to learn.
Well, that's what comes across when I've listened to Gary talk before, and hopefully we will have him on the show one day, is that he had an open mind and he had a willingness to learn. And that's what we all should have in this age of conflict that people are going through. Because out of this conflict, you mentioned opportunity later. We have a great opportunity in the world and in the United States right now to, as Charles Howe said, make a better America and be part of the solution. And I think we do this by following the example of a Gary Player and being willing to listen. But, and then there's Jack Nicklaus, of course, who in 1994 made an unfortunate comment. I think he's lived to live it down. But he made an unfortunate comment about Blacks having different muscle structures, the reason why there were no good Black golfers. Of course, this was pre-Tiger Woods, but only 3 years prior to Tiger's first win at the Masters. He also commented at the time that he didn't buy the notion that he and others had not done enough to diversify the sport of golf. What's your take on Jack's from a socially conscious point of view, especially now?
I have talked to Jack a number of times and have great respect for him, even a like for him. We met for the first time when he was getting his room, his own dedicated museum at the USGA house, the headquarters of the USGA in New Jersey, just outside New York City. And I had asked him a question where, hey, Mr. Nicklaus, the first time I ever asked him a question, hey, Mr. Nicklaus, do you think that, who do you think should be the next person to get a dedicated room, a dedicated museum here at the USGA? He says, well, Michael, that's a good question, but I'd rather not answer that. I don't want to be unfair to anybody. And some demon inside me just said, well, I'd rather you did. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and all of a sudden he gives Mike, maybe Phil Mickelson. And from that, I think we developed a level of respect and honesty between us. The remarks that he made were, I will classify them as ignorant, and him growing as a man of his time. He and most golfers grow up in this sort of, you talk about the social bubbles we create for ourselves now. That's been the case for the PGA Tour for decades. It's sort of a social bubble, and it's a very homogenous community, and you don't have much input into it except for what you see and what you live. And I think as Jack and others have seen change, they have become more understanding and accepting of change. I know that Jack's passion in life and his wife also, Barbara, who he's the golden bear. I call her the mama bear. They both are very passionate about childhood illnesses and will do and have done everything they can to raise money and give money to those things. So they have a level of humanity that's expressed in their charity that not many people do. But you live by your experiences. You say things out of your experiences, and his homogenous background led him to say those things at that time. But I think, and I haven't talked to him about it, but I think if you asked him those questions now, he'd have different answers.
Yeah, I'm sure he would. Well, that leads me then to the other icon in golf, of course, and that's Tiger Woods. And, people, particularly in communities of color, have been very critical of Tiger, perhaps unfairly. But they have commented that they think Tiger hasn't been as outspoken as he should be on racial and social justice issues. When you compare, or when you compare, or any of us compare Tiger Woods to, say, a LeBron James, there's a world of difference between the two, using their celebrity, if you will, to talk about racial issues and social injustice. What's your take on Tiger in that regard?
Tiger is a guy who is a product of a generation of athletes. And, Don, you and I are both old enough to remember a generation of athletes that included Bill Russell and Muhammad Ali and John Carlos and many, many, many other athletes who who considered it just as natural as living and breathing to include a fight for social justice for themselves as a part of their own ascendance as athletes. That their visibility was a stage that they could stand on to tell the truth. And they felt compelled to do that. A generation of athletes later that was more driven by the potential for earnings, let's be honest, that are afforded by companies like Nike and such, to be more circumspect in how they express their views. And famously, Michael Jordan goes, Republicans buy tennis shoes too, that sort of thing. I think Tiger grew up no different than any other successful golfer. He grew up in a pretty homogenous atmosphere among a certain mostly white, mostly rich group of people. And Tiger is not, and I'll be honest about this. I consider Tiger an articulate person, but not necessarily a deep thinker. And I don't require him to be. I don't need Tiger Woods to be a social activist. And he chooses not to be. It's just not his thing. I mean, he puts forward his social concerns through his foundation, which is making opportunities available to kids and things they might not have had a chance to do outside of golf. So if you're a kid in Compton and you have only seen the stars once or twice, he says, well, let's get you in front of a telescope and see if you'd like to be an astronomer. Mm-hmm. I think that's a pretty cool thing too. Right. But not. He doesn't articulate it. He's not the fiery speaker. He's not that guy. I thought the statement he gave in the wake of George Floyd's murder was tepid and half a loaf, but that's who he is. It's all carefully scripted, carefully crafted. So it's about Tiger Woods, but Eldrick Woods, if he's angry, if he is outraged, he hasn't shown it and he hasn't said it. And I don't think he's going to, because it's not who he is. Now, who knows? Again, as we age, as we see things, maybe that'll change. But I know that within this last calendar year, he stood up on a stage and accepted the Congressional Medal of Honor from President Donald Trump. And I know that struck a lot of people, a lot of different ways, many of them in a negative way. And that was even more of a statement than he could have made with any speech or written statement that he could have given. So it's a mixed bag with Tiger. But I don't ask anybody to be anything other than who they are. If he's not that guy, so be it. There's plenty of other guys.
Yeah, there certainly are. So, Michael, your life has been interesting.
Yeah.
Life is a story we tell ourselves. And one of the things we always ask our guests is there some moment in your life that was transcendent, where something happened to you that either changed the course of your life or changed your worldview or made you think, wow, this is something I never expected, or just absolutely blew your mind in some way?
Yeah, so many things, I've been so fortunate, to witness things and to see things and to be in places that I just wonder what I deserve to be there. I mean, partially because of you, I was able to meet Mike Tyson and the Dalai Lama in the same calendar year, which pretty much represents the ends of the universe, I think. If you put those two, on opposite ends of it. I would say the two answers to those questions, though, just to give you an answer, the two things probably were the events that led to me accepting Jesus Christ as my Savior, because they were miraculous and I wasn't really a believer, and those things happened. And I came to my brother's church in a state of despair because of a series of things that happened. And I was so in despair physically and mentally that when my brother was a pastor who died very young when he was 43. And before he died, I came to the church though. he made an altar call, and I gave my life to Christ, and he didn't even recognize who I was at first. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and he just gave me the biggest hug you could ever imagine. Still get choked up even thinking about it. But at that moment, I knew that, I had the ability to overcome and be something different than what I was. Despair was not, my destiny. And the other thing would be the birth of my son. And, you have kids, and you see that life, and, that person who unfailingly gives you love and is unquenchingly ready to receive it. It's just, it's an energy exchange that makes my life worth living. So, Luke, yeah, those two.
Wow, I can relate. Thank you, Michael,
Yeah.
for sharing that, and thank you for being on the podcast. Life is a story we tell ourselves. I miss you, my friend, and maybe I'll see you in December. I'm coming into Washington, D.C. to see my kids. So maybe we'll see each other.
Well, love you to death, Don. Thanks for having me on, and we'll keep the light on for you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast, Life is a Story We Tell Ourselves. And a special thank you to our longtime family friend, Michael Williams, for joining us. Next week, we will be joined by Dr. Bruce Lee, a writer, journalist, digital and computational health expert, systems modeler, professor, and entrepreneur. Dr. Lee regularly writes for Forbes. You won't want to miss it. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and share with your family and friends. And you can also find us on the web at lifeisastorypodcast.com. From our family to yours, stay safe, share happiness, and remember, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing.